All right, first up at number one, no surprise, we have Victor Wembanyama going to the San Antonio Spurs. There's really not much debate here. He's a consensus pick. I have no logical reason to go against that. I think everybody thinks he's going to be an awesome player for many years. So, yeah, number one, Victor Wembanyama. All right, at number two, I have the Charlotte Hornets taking Scoot Henderson from the G League Ignite. I think this is, it's obviously either going to be Scoot or Brandon Miller. I've sort of gone both ways, back and forth, like a John McEnroe, Yvonne Lendl match, or Bjorn Borg, whoever it was back then. I think there's good arguments to be made on both sides. I think Brandon Miller is the so-called better fit. I am concerned, a little bit how a Scoot LaMelo backcourt works. But at the end of the day, I think I'm going to go with Scoot just because I feel like there's a chance that he has that quote unquote it factor. And yeah, I mean, it's super subjective, and I could easily see that, it'll look dumb, in a couple years, but it could look really smart. So, I'm hoping for the best. Scoot seems like a good kid, and super strong. I kind of see him not really like what some people have him like a Derrick Rose or Russell Westbrook. I don't really see that. I see more like a sort of like a Mike Conley, Drew Holiday, even shades of like Baron Davis. Like, I think he's going to be, although he wasn't a good defender this year, I think he has that ability. And I think if he's not a super high usage guy, he can focus more on defense and playmaking. And obviously he needs the 3-point shot to come around. And it's a gamble. I mean, if it never comes around, he may just not be very good, and he could be a bust. On the other hand, I'm not quite as high on Brandon Miller, maybe, as some people. I do think he's a solid third pick, but and I'll get to him next. But yeah, I think there's just enough separation where I feel comfortable picking Scoot at number two. So that's who I have. All right, so with the third pick, I already gave it away. We're going to have Brandon Miller from Alabama go to the Portland Trailblazers. I think, Brandon Miller is kind of that wing, that big wing that everybody's looking for. I think his defense is probably okay. I hope it can be better than that. Not sure he's like a super positive defender, but the shooting and offensive upside is pretty high at that size. So yeah, he was super productive, and it's hard to go against that. And I would note a couple flaws or things that give me a little bit of pause. He's really an older freshman. He's already 20, so he's like a year older than most of the freshman prospects. And the other thing is that, I mean, while he made a lot of threes, and I think he's going to be a good shooter, his release is a bit low, and his shots could be a little flat. So, hopefully he can work on that. But he's a pretty solid number 3 pick. I will say that the guy that we're going to have at number 4, if I was Portland, I'd at least look at this next guy. And I don't even know if Portland's going to keep the pick anyway, so this may not be Portland's pick. But yeah, we have Brandon Miller at number 3, and then let's get to number 4. All right, so at number 4, I have Houston taking Taylor Hendricks. I think I have a link to the first impression video I did of Hendricks really early in the season. When I said, actually, I thought he might be a lottery pick, and obviously he's ending up really high on my board. I kind of think he's almost in a tier of his own, where he's he's really like the prototype, or sort of the archetype that every team is looking for. I mean, he really can fit with every team in theory if he can shoot, which I'm fairly confident he'll shoot based on what he did this year. I think he can shoot, he can defend. Okay playmaker, not great there, but really you're getting him for, his shooting at that size and potentially the ability to defend multiple positions. Not really a 5, but maybe he could, switch on to 5s occasionally as he gets stronger. So I really like Taylor Hendricks, and you might think it's a little bit of a weird fit with Houston, where they already have Jabari, Tari Eason, but I kind of like that they could have this like giant lineup with those guys. Just a really tall lineup where maybe everybody can shoot, except for the backcourt. But yeah, I think it could be super interesting. So Taylor Hendricks going 4. I realize that's higher than a lot of boards have him, but yeah, I guess I like him that much in this draft. All right, so at 5, this might surprise some people, but I have Grady Dick from Kansas going to Detroit. I realize, probably many of you don't think he has like the highest ceiling or whatever, but I just want to give Detroit a really good shooter who can shoot, really spot up shooting, off movement, really smart player. I just feel like he's one of these basketball lifers who, probably when he quits playing basketball, he's going to be a GM one of these days or something like that. I just like his sort of his basketball personality, and I think he's going to find ways to help Detroit win. And they definitely need his shooting. So, yeah, Grady Dick to Detroit. All right, so another shocker hot take here at number 6. I have Orlando Magic taking Jet Howard, who's in mocks I've seen. He's probably like 10 spots lower than this. But I just think people are sleeping on Jet's skill set and like what he can do with the ball. Like his combination of, really it's dribble, pass, shoot. Like I think he's pretty advanced. Obviously, I have him this high. The defense is a concern. I did a video on him earlier in the year, and there's a link here. Definitely that was one of my concerns. I think he got a little bit better as the season wore on, even though I know he had some ankle problems. But it looked to me like his feel on the defensive end got a little bit better at least. I feel like he has the tools, or he has okay tools. I think he should be an okay defender in time. We'll see. I mean, it's definitely, like I said, that's the concern. But like the offensive package to me is just it's too intriguing to pass up. And especially if you're Orlando, like you can really use another creator. I think Franz is a shooter and a creator. They got Paolo, who's obviously a creator but not necessarily a shooter. The backcourt, I mean, there's really no shooting there. I just think Jet can really improve the offensive ceiling of Orlando. And yeah, I mean, to be clear, he could be a bust. But so this is sort of, high risk, high reward. We'll see how it goes. Jet Howard going to Orlando at 6. All right, so at number 7, I have Indiana taking Anthony Black. I really think there are like 4 or 5 guys here. It's really hard to choose between them for me. I finally have Black here at 7. Man, if he could shoot, if I was confident in his shot, I think he'd really be pushing up probably towards number 3 because other than the shooting, he's got so much going for him. He's a really good athlete, not elite, but good athlete. He doesn't have elite length, but he has good size for someone who can handle, I don't think he's quite the elite point guard handler, but definitely a secondary ball handler. His passing is extremely good, great vision, good instincts on defense. I think he's got, work to do on that end, but I think he's I mean, the way I describe him, he's kind of like the fourth ball brother to me. better than LiAngelo, but he's kind of like along the lines of Alonso and LaMelo, somewhere in there. Maybe worse than both of those. Maybe he'll end up being better than one of those. But yeah, that's the kind of player I think he is. It really all hinges, and just like it did for Lonzo and LaMelo, like he really needs to shoot. He has some slashing ability, but like it's gonna open up so much if he can shoot. And the concern is it's like he really doesn't have a lot of confidence in his shot. So, I think he's a little bit of a project, but he's good enough where, and compared to the other guys, and their flaws and strengths and stuff, that I end up having him at 7, and he could definitely bust. Like if he doesn't ever learn to shoot, he'll be a bust. But if he can shoot, he has a pretty high ceiling, I think. So yeah, let's see. Anthony Black from Arkansas to Indiana. So number 8, we have Cason Wallace from Kentucky going to the Washington Wizards, where hopefully he can play alongside whoever is going to replace Bradley Beal. No, I don't know. But I think Cason Wallace he's not elite at anything. I feel like he's kind of somewhere like in between a DeLon Wright and Marcus Smart. He doesn't really do anything at elite level except kind of try hard, right? His motor is super high or runs super hot. I feel like he's going to find a way to win. I feel like also there's the Calipari effect where Kentucky guards always seem to outperform their draft stock, and I'm pretty serious about that. That always does kind of play a little bit of a role in where I rank these guys. So yeah, I think you could pick other guys here. It's kind of hard to find a good fit for Washington, but actually, like I just think that at some point they're going to blow up the team, so it doesn't really matter. But yeah, I like Cason Wallace. He was super productive, and I think he could be really good. At the same time, it wouldn't surprise me if he's kind of a G Leaguer for life, and that's kind of how this draft might go. It really flattens out around here. It feels like the next 10 or 12 picks to me, and there's some names missing from this so far you may have noticed that we'll get to later, that you may be wondering like why I don't have listed some of these people already, but yeah, so I don't know, this draft is a little bit weak, and I feel like at this point I just want to take the best basketball players I can, even if they're maybe not elite in any one thing, but a lot of them kind of have similar flaws where, frankly, a lot of them just like can't shoot. So yeah, Cason Wallace goes to Washington, number 8. All right, so at number 9 I have Keontae George from Baylor. I'm going to Utah. In a way similar to Jet, where I think his skill package and what he brings on the offensive side is probably underrated. Well, maybe it's overrated by some and underrated by others. It's a little bit weird. I do think he's one of the highest skill levels in this draft. I'd say like top 5. And although he's not, he's on the smaller end, but he's pretty strong. I think, as we saw with like Jaden Hardy last year, sometimes these guys can hit and be a lot better than you thought. Maybe like a CJ McCollum going back further. So I think if you're Utah, just take some shots like this. Like maybe Keontae is not an elite star, but could raise the floor of your offense. Bring something you don't have on that end. And I think he's one thing I'll say is I think he's a little bit tougher on defense than people realize. Maybe that's his size, but when I saw him on the defensive end, he's willing to be physical and take charges, things like that a lot of times you don't see with smaller so-called combo guards. So I don't know. I just feel like there's some upside here, that maybe is going under the radar a little bit. So yeah, Keontae George, number 9, Utah. All right, so Derek Lively going to Dallas at number 10. I can make this pretty short. I think he can be better than Dwight Powell. I think he could be Dwight Powell with more rim protection. No, but seriously, I actually like Lively more and more as the season went on. Obviously, he seemed very limited on the offensive end. You know, he's not shooting anything outside of 3 feet from the rim. But for now, he gives you that vertical spacing. He's obviously really big. He's athletic, and I just can't help but compare him to Wiseman, James Wiseman, as a Warriors fan. He's sort of like the anti-Wiseman in my mind, where I think there's some Tyson Chandler vibes there, where I think he's just gonna find a role and be in the league for like 15 years or something. And I can really see that, Dallas could use that size, and I think Luka could really use Lively to run off screens and as a pick and roll partner, which hopefully Lively can get to that, develop that. I think it could be really cool. So yeah, I have Lively going at 10. I toyed with him going even higher than this, but at the end of the day, I think 10 probably makes sense. Yep. All right, so at 11, I have Orlando taking Jarris Walker from Houston. I have some issues with Walker. I think I'm concerned about his shooting. I'm a little bit concerned about his perimeter defense. But I think if you see him as a 4 who might shoot, and you just kind of hope for the best there, I think he may develop a little bit into someone like a Paul Millsap. He's definitely a smart player. I like his vision. I like his passing. He can handle the ball a little bit, but that doesn't seem like a big strength to me. So I'm not exactly sure how he'll fit in with the Magic with Franz and Paolo. But I think at this point in the draft, he's probably the best talent, or the most talented player to take there. So number 11, Jarris Walker to Orlando. Okay, so at 12, I have Cam Whitmore from Villanova going to the OKC Thunder. If you watch my video on Cam, you may have gathered the impression that I'm not really his biggest fan. I think he's probably, from what I hear, going to go quite a bit higher than this. I'm just not sure really that he has any plus skill at this point. A lot of people point to his penetration driving. I just didn't see that. I watched 4 or 5 games at least. I saw him try to penetrate sometimes. Definitely can do it when he has the lane is open. But I'm kind of skeptical. To me, he reminds me, and I mean, as a Warriors fan, I watched Kuminga all season, or for the last 2 years. He kind of reminds me of Kuminga, but I'd actually say I think Kuminga is a better prospect. But physically, I think Kuminga actually is a better athlete and bigger. And we've seen that he's struggled to shoot and also to slash, because when you can't shoot, that becomes a lot more difficult. And I think maybe Cam has a little bit tighter handle, so maybe it just goes his way and he develops into that kind of slasher, and maybe a shot comes around, and maybe hopefully he can be a better passer than what I saw at Villanova. So I have issues with him, but I guess I also don't want to I don't want to be too out on Cam, so I think this is about as far as I can let him drop. So Cam Whitmore to OKC at 12. All right, so here we have a Thompson twin, and it's not Amen. It's Ausar Thompson. Going to Toronto at 13. The reason I have Ausar going for Amen is he seems like he's a better shooter, and Amen seems, I don't want to say it's hopeless because nobody's ever hopeless, but I'm really skeptical of his shooting. I'm not fully out on the Thompson twins. That's kind of why I have him here, but this is kind of like me punting. Honestly, I watched a little bit of OTE, and it just seems like a dumpster fire league. So it's really hard for me to evaluate these guys. Everybody loves them, and maybe they're awesome, and I'll learn a lesson. And the OTE, will grow, and everybody will come to know that there's a lot of talent there. To me, it looked like they were playing against, they're like 20-year-olds playing against tiny high school kids. So I don't know. It just didn't look good. Their stats are weirdly, oddly too close to each other. Like, it doesn't even make sense. So I don't know. I kind of just don't buy the whole thing, but I think that talent kind of levels off. This is another area in the draft with talent. The upper ceiling talent really levels off, so it's probably a good spot to just put both of these guys. So I have Alistar going to Toronto at 13, and then Amen going to New Orleans at 14. All right, so coming in at 15, we're going to have Brandon Pajemski from Santa Clara going to the Atlanta Hawks. Brandon was one of the first videos I did very early in the season, and if you saw that, and there'll be a link here, I was kind of skeptical of his athleticism, and I still am a little bit skeptical of it in terms of his ever being like a super high level primary creator type. I don't really see that, but I do kind of see like a Dante DiVincenzo, sort of a hybrid of DiVincenzo and Ty Jerome with those floaters. I think his path to being really good is obviously with the shooting, but he was so productive, and he seems like such a smart player. And although he doesn't have good length, it's pretty below average actually. He's strong, so I kind of trust that about him, that he'll be able to hold up physically. And like I said before, the talent levels off here, and I think Brandon was probably the best remaining player at this point. So he goes to Atlanta at 15, and I think they could use a guy like him coming off the bench. I think that'll actually be pretty good for both sides. All right, so at 16 we have the Utah Jazz taking Chris Murray from Iowa. Chris is obviously the younger twin. I don't even know. One of them's older, one of them's younger. I don't know which one's which, but the twin brother of Keegan Murray, who plays for Sacramento. And I've been on Chris probably since for a couple years now, even before last year. It was pretty obvious that it was definitely obvious last year, or when he was he got minutes, I think a couple years ago, or maybe last year, that he was going to have a breakout year, and everybody was going to suddenly realize like, hey, Chris is pretty good too. So I think he's, while the stats he wasn't as productive as Keegan, he was still super productive, and I think he's a pretty good shooter. His shooting, his 3-point percentage doesn't look that great, but he took a lot of them, and I like his shot. You can't always trust the 3-point percentage alone, but it was pretty high volume, and it's a good looking stroke, and he's tall, so I think that's gonna be his. I mean, obviously that's a skill he needs, but I kind of trust it. He can also drive a little bit. Now, I don't know how good that's, he's going to be with that, but he has some offensive moves, like some ball handling. Probably not like his brother, but I don't know. I'm kind of just betting that, as good as Keegan seems to be, and Keegan looked better in the NBA than I underrated him, so I kind of don't want to make the same mistake twice, so I'm moving Chris Murray up to 16 for the Utah Jazz. All right, so at 17, I have Jordan Hawkins going to Los Angeles Lakers. This is actually, I've moved him up quite a bit since my last video. I'll just be honest, like, I'm not a huge Jordan Hawkins fan, so I would have him lower, sort of in a vacuum, than this. probably significantly lower, like in the 20s. But, you know, if I'm the Lakers and he's there, and this is assuming a lot of other guys are gone, like maybe Podziemski would be a great fit there, and even Chris Murray might be a really good fit, but let's say they're off the table. Also like Keontae, I'm assuming Keontae George, and even Jet Howard. Jet Howard's probably a good pick, but, you know, Jordan Hawkins is kind of... The reason I don't like him is because I think he's super one-dimensional, but that one dimension of shooting, I think really looks legit, like maybe like a Buddy Hield level, you know, or Seth Curry or something along those lines. Maybe JJ Redick, and like if he can shoot, he might be able to shoot right away. And what do the Lakers need? They, you know, what was obvious, they need shooting, and so, you know, they don't have time to mess around. And if they can get Hawkins in the draft, that's probably a huge win for them. So I think it makes sense if he's there. He might not be there, but if he's there, I think it kind of makes sense for them. So coming in at number 18, we have Leonard Miller from the G League Ignite going to the Miami Heat. This is a bit lower than where I had Miller the last time. I've kind of moved down on him the last month or so. I think I had him as high as 7. Remember, the draft it's pretty flat when you actually think about team needs and fits and stuff like that. It's pretty dynamic. I think I've soured on him mostly because of the shooting. I mean, while his free throw percentage was pretty good, it wasn't a lot of attempts. So, I mean, there's just not much to go on there. His shot's a bit funky. It's a little bit like Jaren Jackson, kind of like pushing it. You know, if he ever gets that skill, obviously it's a completely different ball game because he has some ability to drive and take the ball up the court. But really what I think Miami could use is his size, his motor, tremendous motor. Like, he's really a junkyard dog. The rebounding. So I think, you know, you can bring him in, especially when Bam sits, and have a guy who maybe can switch onto, I don't know, maybe he'll be able to actually switch onto point guards at times with his length. So he's pretty intriguing defensively because of how well he moves. And yeah, I mean, I think, you know, I definitely have some concerns. I don't think he has the greatest feel, even though, you know, every time I watch a G League game, they kept saying he's a former guard who grew a lot. I don't really see a ton of guard skills. I mean, he can bring the ball at the court, but usually when he did that, there wasn't a lot of pressure on him. I mean, if he could do that, if he could drive and he could shoot, and he was a little bit bigger, he'd be like Triple J, but I don't really see that. But yeah, at 18, I think he could help the Miami Heat, you know, get him into that Heat culture. And they may not want to go with Miller because he's so young, and they may just want somebody who could help them win next year, in which case maybe they go for Jaime Jaquez, someone like that. But for me, I'd probably take Miller here. All right, so at 19, we have my Golden State Warriors selecting Dariq Whitehead from Duke. I think they're in Golden State is in a tough spot because they really they've been kind of punished by going with all the youth in the last few years, and it hasn't worked out that well. Wiseman is already gone. Jordan Poole, they're giving him $30 million, and he kind of shit the bed last year. Kuminga was not even a rotation player in the playoffs. Moody, who I like more than Kuminga, really like more than any of those guys, actually did get to play in the second round and was pretty decent. So I still have hope for Moody after a pretty bad regular season. But anyway, getting back to this pick, I think if Podziemski is there, and probably Jordan Hawkins, I think they go, and actually even Chris Murray, I think they're going to go with an older player. If they don't trade this pick, they may trade this pick for a vet, probably a smart move. But let's say all those guys are already off the board, which in this mock they're off the board. Dariq Whitehead is he had a bad season, but he has a good pedigree. Obviously, he was one of the top recruits coming into the season last year, and Golden State historically has loved guys with pedigrees that kind of drop. And I think he fits into their system as a guy who, he's a wing, like he's basically like your typical, you know, solid wing eventually. Now, the thing is, he's super, super young, and Kerr would probably stick him to the bench, and he wouldn't play for 2 or 3 seasons. So it doesn't really make sense, but I think from a value perspective, it probably does make sense for a team in this range. It's just really depending on the fit. But I think, although he didn't have a great season, he kind of has the potential to be that solid 3-and-D wing who looks, better over time. So yeah, Dariq Whitehead to Golden State. Never going to happen in a million years, but kind of makes sense for this mock. At 20, I have the Houston Rockets taking Jalen Hood-Schifino from Indiana. Let's just call him JHS. So I think, obviously Houston needs, they need a point guard that's better than Jalen Green or Porter. And I'm not sure that JHS is that guy, but I think I'm a little bit higher on him than Kobe Buffkin, who I think they could also consider, but I think JHS has a little bit more chance to actually be a point guard. Both of them need to shoot. I like Schifino's size, and I like his handle. It's pretty tight, and I think his ability to run pick and roll is probably his sort of most NBA ready skill right now. He doesn't really get to the rim. I think that was, other than the 3-point shooting, I think that was one of his big problems. He really loves the mid-range pull-up. That's an important shot when you get to the playoffs, but I mean, in order to be a legit NBA point guard, or even a 2, you're really going to have to shoot 3. I think if he does, he's going to look a little bit like Malcolm Brogdon, because I think on D, he can actually be pretty darn solid with his size. So, yeah, I think at this point in the draft, it makes sense. He might go higher than this, but if he's there at 20, I think it's a decent pick. All right, so starting at 21, Brooklyn has the next 2 picks, and I think that gives them a chance to take someone who, with Kobe Buffkin at 21, profiles to be an interesting risk at the shooting guard position, or maybe he's a combo guard. I don't really think he's a point guard, but not just because the shooting is a question. I'm not sure I trust his handle, let's say, as much as JHS, who I had going to Houston. I also am a little bit concerned about Buffkin's defense. I know that's one of the things people like about him, and I thought it was pretty good at Michigan, at least at times. But I think with his size, it's always a concern. Like, he's not. It's not that he's short. He's like 6'6" in shoes, but his frame is pretty slight, and I do think he needs to put on a good amount of weight. And I know people say that all the time, but I just worry that physically he's going to have a little bit of trouble defending as a 2. So yeah, there's a few concerns there, but I did like, he definitely had flashes of driving and things like that. I just think to unlock all that, he's got a ways to go. But still, I think I was kind of intrigued by him about starting probably about midway through the year. He is young. He's really freshman aged. He's actually like literally a day. I think he's a day younger than Jet Howard. So that's definitely huge in his favor. For my taste, I think he's getting a little bit too much hype. I've heard that he might go as high as late lottery, or even like pushing top 10, 11, 12. That seems too high for me. I do like him, but I think so it probably won't last this long anyway. But yeah, Brooklyn would be a good destination for him. All right, so at 22, with the second pick in a row, I have Brooklyn taking a shot on Victor Wembanyama's teammate Bilal Coulibaly. I haven't quite drunk all the Kool-Aid. Sorry, that's a terrible pun and poorly delivered. But yeah, I mean, I see the guy has tools. He's very young, and big wingspan, all that. Pretty good athlete. doesn't seem like he has a lot of skill right now. But I guess you're hoping for a Sean Marion down the road. I mean, I haven't really heard that comp, but that's kind of what I envision if he really does hit. Yeah, I've heard people say like Kawhi Leonard just doesn't make sense when a guy can like barely dribble and he doesn't shoot. So I think especially since Brooklyn has these 2 picks in a row, at this point in the draft, might as well take a shot. I don't think, they're not really missing out on a ton of star power after this pick, so it makes sense. I don't know much about him. I see the tools. That's about it. And yeah, good luck to whoever gets him. So up next at 23, we have Noah Clowney from Alabama going to Portland. This is a really tough one because I have no idea if, a little bit like Golden State, different than Golden State. They're in a weird situation where if they want to keep Lillard or keep him happy, maybe they go for a vet here, or not a vet, an older player like a Jaime Jaquez or Trace Jackson Davis. But it's hard to know. I mean, we don't know what's going to happen with the number 3 pick. Like if they get Scoot Henderson or they just decide to go to a youth movement or whatever. I'm going to give him Noah Clowney. I think he's pretty intriguing in a way like Leonard Miller. Maybe he ends up even better than Leonard Miller. I mean, you could probably argue I should have swapped them. Really big. Not clear if he's a 4 or 5. Sort of like Miller. I think they're in between positions. Clowney is super, super young. I think he's like an August 2004 birthday or July. So very, very young. He showed, he stepped out in the perimeter and shot a little bit, but wasn't very good. Free throw percentage wasn't very good. It's hard to know what his elite skill is. I think my guess is he's going to, eventually just be a 5 and have to get a little bit stronger and work on that. But he does move pretty well, and if the shot comes around, then that's obviously huge for him. So he does have upside, and I just think he's, at the same time he's a project. But so does it make sense for Portland? Maybe like if they go to a youth movement, I could see it if they had Scoot, Shaedon Sharpe, and Noah Clowney. That's potentially a pretty interesting core in a few years. So it really depends on which direction they want to go. Okay, so at 24, I have the Sacramento Kings taking Trace Jackson Davis for Indiana. I've been following TJD since his freshman year. Every single year I thought he should come out. And he's kind of always been late 20s or early 30s type of pick for me. And here we are, and I have him going 24. I think he could help a team like Sacramento. I mean, obviously they want to win now. They have a big window, but I think they want to build on the success they had last year. They could obviously go with a younger player and just have, develop some homegrown talent like that. But I think TJD could actually help them right away. He's not Sabonis, but I think he kind of has that. He has a lot of the things that Sabonis has, right? Like I think this play style could be, you could bring TJD off the bench and have sort of this continuity in play style where TJD runs up the court, he can rebound. It might be a better shot blocker than Sabonis, even though he's smaller. And his passing, I don't even want to say it's underrated. I think everybody knows like TJD is actually a really, really good passer at the position. So I think that a guy like that, obviously he doesn't shoot. We all know that, but Sabonis doesn't shoot either. So this is not a replacement for Sabonis. It's just I think it's size off the bench, and he could be pretty valuable to a team like Sacramento that, maybe has some trouble attracting free agents there, and they want to grow through the draft. So yeah, TJD I think it'd be a good pick. All right, so at 25, I have the Memphis Grizzlies selecting Bryce Sensabaugh from Ohio State to add another oddity to their roster. With like Desmond Bane and Kenneth Foster and David Roddy. They like these big boys. I have I think everybody has concerns about Sensabaugh. For one, there's some injury concerns or just some health stuff going on. With his knees at that size might be an issue. But putting that aside, I think he's dropped quite a bit from where I would have had him earlier in the year. He's kind of a bucket getter. I mean, and at the college level for sure. Like it looks, he's a guy. He's a 2-level scorer. He really loves getting to the mid range, to the elbows, and creating some separation there. And he's a really good 3-point shooter. Doesn't really get to the rim as much as you'd like. I think that's the main issue I have with him. If he could, nobody's Luka, but if he had that in his game, you could say this is like sort of a poor man's Luka. Like that would be his path to being for sure. He can't be a star in the NBA without being able to get to the basket, and I think that's going to be an issue for him. But mid-range and 3-point, I think he's going to get buckets. The real question is on the other end, how is Diaz going to hold up? He's weirdly, like, not really built. I mean, he's built like a lineman. So we'll see. I think it's a concern, but he's such a kind of prodigy in terms of his shooting and bucket getting. I think it's a risk. The kind of risk that Memphis seems to like to take. So it could be a fun experiment there. Passing is another thing where, I think it's a weakness that he has to work on. And so I don't know where he's going to end up. He might not even get taken in the first round at this point. I haven't heard much about him through the draft process lately. But, Memphis likes to take some bets like this, and he feels like a pick they might make. So yeah, Bryce Sensabaugh to Memphis. If they do go with an older player, Jaime Jaquez is one that I think could be interesting there. It's just, and I almost went with Jaquez here, but his shooting is too much of a concern, and I think I think it's a matter of like if he. Well, we'll talk about Jaime, but yeah, in the end, I'm going with Sensabaugh. All right, so it didn't take long to get to Jaime Jaquez here. With the 26th pick, I have the Indiana Pacers selecting Jaime Jaquez from UCLA. I think, to me, Jaquez is a 4. I think that's like one of the bigger questions. Like, do you see him as a wing or more of a big? I think he's really on both sides of the ball, more like a 4. I think the way he scored at UCLA with a lot of post-ups and stuff inside the arc, I don't know how that's going to translate. I would think probably doesn't translate that well. I think he's going to have to be more of a cutter. I'd like to see him play, kind of be like a Christian Brown. I just don't think he has that level of sort of more wingy athletic ability. But the other big issue with Jaquez is the shooting, which hasn't really come around in 4 years. So you kind of have to hope for that. But at this point in the draft, maybe it's a risk worth taking. He's such a smart winning player. I'd like to think maybe even if the shooting never comes around, he sticks around the league. But realistically, it'll be tough if the shooting doesn't come around. So yeah, I have him here. I could see him dropping to the second round draft night just because teams could be concerned really that he might never be a shooter. But sometimes you have to take some risks for guys that the perceived upside might not be that high to people, but I think if he does shoot, he's it's kind of like guys like Caleb Martin, right, who I think had maybe similar concerns, but they become super valuable once they shoot. So I think Jaquez falls into that category where, like, he could be out of the league if he doesn't shoot, but if he does shoot, he could be a really valuable player. And I think Indiana could use more sort of winning players like that. So yeah, Jaime Jaquez to Indiana at 26. So at 27, I have the Charlotte Hornets selecting Jordan Walsh from Arkansas. I have no doubt that in my mind that Jordan Walsh is betting on himself in this draft. I think a lot of guys in his position, where he was kind of like the third or fourth wheel at Arkansas, has issues with shooting that he needs to solve. I would think a lot of prospects in his position would have gone back to school, but he's coming out, and I still think he's probably worth a first round pick, even though it's obvious that shooting is a big issue for him. I really love his motor, his size, his length. I think he has like a 7'2" wingspan. He's just super gritty, and if that shot comes around, you're looking at I think a very valuable defender and 3-and-D guy. I mean, he's going to be great at that. Not the best athlete, but just so tough, and with that size, I think he could be really good. And Charlotte could use more Jordan Walshes. So yes, number 27, Charlotte takes Jordan Walsh. All right, so at 28, we have the Utah Jazz taking Julian Phillips from Tennessee. I think, honestly, you could probably swap Jordan Walsh and Julian Phillips. And, similar weaknesses. Julian Phillips needs to shoot. They're both kind of similar sized. And I think, the eventual archetype, even if their sort of basketball personalities are not exactly the same, they'd kind of be filling the same role. You'd be getting, a big wing, and if either of them shoots, they're going to be a big 3-and-D wing, which is super valuable, obviously. So I think Indiana seems like they have a bunch of picks. They can take shots like this. Utah. I said Indiana, I meant Utah. Utah just has to take shots at players and hope that they can develop. All right, so here we get the Indiana pick at 29. Indiana selects Amari Bailey from UCLA. Amari, highly recruited player, really started coming on towards the end of the year. Like a lot of the players in the second half of the draft, he really needs to shoot to unlock his potential. I really the whole season, I'd lump him in with Jalen Hood-Schifino and Kobe Buffkin in that regard. Whichever one of them shoots, and if multiple ones of them shoot, they all need to shoot to survive in the NBA. And I think Amari, of all of them, might actually have the best overall set of tools with his athleticism and size in terms of his strength. He's just not taller than the other two, but he's well built, thick. So, and I like him. I think his handle's pretty good. I think we got to see that more in the tournament. We got to see more out of him when Jalen Clark got injured. And worth taking a shot here if you're Indiana. They have a pretty good backcourt already with Nembhard and Halliburton, but they could use kind of to be able to bring Bailey off the bench and let him develop there while they're just trying to grow their core. I think if he hits, he could be really, really good. So that's the pick. All right, so at 30, we have the LA Clippers selecting Nick Smith Jr. from Arkansas. You were probably wondering if I had him or when I was going to have him come off the board. He drops all the way to the last pick of the first round, but it's still a first round pick. He didn't have a great season for someone who was thought to be like a potential top 5 pick. I guess from what I've seen in mocks, he's still going to go lottery. Like I said earlier in this video, as a Warriors fan, I get to watch a lot of Jordan Poole, and maybe I have some trauma with the year he had, but I worry about Nick Smith. Definitely worry about him on the defensive side. He's so slight. I just don't know that he's ever going to be anything other than a really bad defender. And in order to even that out, he's just going to have to be incredible on the other end. and I didn't get to see it. Now, I didn't watch him in high school, and so I only know the reputation. But from what I saw, I don't know. It felt like if I put him higher than this, I'd just be going with the flow and, not really trusting my own eyes. So, and the stats. So he goes 30. He'll have to fight it out with Bones Hyland, although this is just a hypothetical because, like I said, he's probably going to go in the lottery. But, he could surprise me and turn out to be really good. You never know with these things. So there it is. That's the end of the first round. All right, so now I just want to give a 4 or 5 guys that are kind of intriguing to me in the second round or as undrafted free agents, which I think probably could be 3 or 4 of these, or almost all of them might be UDFAs. And I'll just briefly go over each one of them. All right, so first up is Terquavion Smith from NC State, who I actually really liked last year. I thought last year he should have come out. Sometimes these guys go back and their stock actually goes down. Hopefully he got some NIL money. But I think watching Terquavion this year, he looked more like a point guard, honestly. Like I think he actually did improve his playmaking. I thought he was underrated in that last year, but he got better there this year. And I think maybe I didn't notice it so much last year, but obviously, not that I didn't notice how undersized he is. He at 163 pounds, it's kind of insane how light he is. But his defense is actually not as bad. It's not atrocious for that size. You would assume somebody that small would be just a terrible defender, but it's kind of a shame he's not 15 pounds heavier. He's pretty tenacious on D, and that's why I have him dropping in the second round. And who knows, on draft night, he could go undrafted. I have no idea. I liked JD Davison last year, and I think he ended up going in the 50s. So you never know, but I think Terquavion is still pretty intriguing. I'm not sure how realistic or how legitimate the shooting is, but he does get them up. He's a little bit like Bones Hyland in that way, but I'd say maybe less of a shooter, maybe more of a playmaker, and maybe a better defender. I just think he's got to get into a good weight program, and they've got to pack on 10-15 pounds for him to have a chance, but he's pretty interesting. All right, so next up is Mo Gay from Washington State. It's interesting because I think if you like Leonard Miller and Noah Clowney in the first round, I'm not sure Mo Gay is really far behind those guys. He's actually bigger. He's really long. And so he has center size. He needs to bulk up a little bit, but he has even more center size. I could buy him as a legit center. Which is fun. The funny thing about him is he wasn't a good rim protector. I don't quite understand that. I'm hoping he can work on that. It's one of the reasons I eventually didn't put him in the first round, because his rim protection was just not there for his size. You would expect that, but he moves really well on the perimeter. For that size, I think he's exceptional mover. And while the shooting is not there, really, he can make some plays, and he's got some handle to him. So there's part of me, the intrigue there is it's a little Pascal Siakam-ish to his game. Now, is he going to get there? Probably not. It's probably very little chance that he ever gets to that level. But I'm actually surprised that there's not a little bit more buzz around Mo Gay. I tend to think it's just people, there's some East Coast bias and people just not watching Washington State, Pac-12 or whatever it's called these days. But I think, I'm hoping he gets drafted in the 30s. If he doesn't get drafted, he is an unbelievable UDFA target in my mind. So Mo Gay, Washington State, look out. All right, so Colin Castleton got on my radar, I think last year or maybe even 2 years ago. Played Played for Florida. He's a center. Not like the best athlete, but I think he actually moves pretty well at his size, like especially up and down the court. And really what makes him stand out is his basketball IQ. I just think his passing is really good. And, you know, if he finds the right fit, say like a Golden State, it's kind of one of my dreams that Golden State would sign him to a two-way. I think given the right fit in the right system, he could get some minutes in an NBA rotation eventually. So Colin Castleton, to me, worthy of a second-round pick. And when I say second-round pick, I mean like a first half of the second-round pick. All right, so Charles Bediako for Alabama. I think he's going under the radar as well as Castleton. I think they were both at the G League Combine, and neither of them got invited to the NBA Draft Combine in Chicago. I'm not sure why. I think Bediako, going into this season, I really thought he'd be on the draft radar and, you know, was likely to be a first-round pick, but it seems like he may go undrafted, and I don't know, maybe I'm the only one who thinks could be a potentially NBA player. I thought he was like one of the big reasons that Alabama was so good this year. I think he's got good hands, rim protector. He's not a plotter by any means. I mean, he's maybe not a switch big, but I think he moves fairly well. I don't know. He's a bit older, but I'm a little bit surprised that he's not mocked really like early second round. Maybe the NBA. I mean, I know for years and years, you know, the NBA was kind of getting lower and lower on bigs, but you see, you got to go up against Jokic and Embiid and some other guys now, so it wouldn't hurt to have a Bediako as like a third or fourth big. If you're Detroit, I mean, you could have like 8 bigs, so I don't know why he doesn't have a little bit more hype. All right, so next up is Jalen Slauson from Furman. He's been on my radar for a while. I mean, he's an older prospect, but always putting up good stats. And this was, I think, his best year for sure. And he showed signs of shooting. Had like 46 dunks, which is at 6'7" or 6'8". That's really good, really impressive, even in a mid-major. I mean, he's kind of like a Jaime Jaquez, you know, maybe like the second round version of Jaime Jaquez. Now maybe he'll be drafted in the, you know, top half of the second round. I'm not exactly sure where he's being mocked. I think he should be drafted there. If he goes undrafted, he's a great target for a two-way. Honestly, like if he went undrafted, I might give him a guaranteed deal for a couple years. So Jalen Slauson, he's pretty interesting. One thing to note, like I said, I think he's a bit like the archetype of Jaime. He looks like more of a 4 to me than a 3. So maybe, you know, kind of in the same sense as Jaime, like a little bit undersized as a 4. But yeah, if the shooting turns out to be real, then he could be pretty good. All right, so the last guy up is kind of the bonus. I haven't seen Tavion Kinsey mocked really anywhere, even in like top 100. Maybe Vicini has him in the top 100. But this guy, it's interesting. Like there's so little hype, but he's a completely nuclear athlete in terms of his explosiveness at 6'5", and he's a really good playmaker. Like he's a point guard who can jump out of the gym. Now his shooting is terrible. I think he's a 5th-year senior. He's never shot at all, really. His percentages might have been a little bit higher this year, but it was like very small sample. You know, I mean, again, going back to the fact that I'm a Warriors fan, like I've been watching Gary Payton for a couple years now, and it kind of reminds me of that in a way. Like Gary Payton, incredibly explosive player who took many, many years to get into an NBA rotation because he couldn't shoot at all. So maybe optimistically, you know, I don't think Tavion Kinsey is going to come into a camp this summer and shoot, but who knows? Maybe he sticks in the G League for a couple years, or maybe goes to Europe and learns how to shoot and comes back. But if you haven't seen him at all, do yourself a favor and go watch a Marshall game, because he's a super fun player, and I think the NBA would be better to have, you know, for having him if he ever does figure out the shooting. All right, so that's gonna wrap it up. My mock draft, at least the first round, and I threw in a few bonuses there for the second round. Some interesting or intriguing targets I'd look at in the second round in UDFA, and yeah, let's see what happens on draft night. Maybe I'll do a recap at some point of my thoughts on the draft. I think there's potential for a lot of movement on draft night, and maybe I'll compare what actually goes down to this mock. And I know this mock is probably going to be nothing like what actually happens on draft night, because it's what I would do. But yeah, nevertheless, it would be interesting to do some comparisons. So if you have any thoughts, comments, questions, leave them down below. And other than that, I'll see you next time. Enjoy draft night.